condemnation piling on. In just about every major British newspaper,
Prince Andrew and the former President Bill Clinton have been named in newly released court documents relating to the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
The fallout growing from that interview with Prince Andrew, answering questions for the first time.
After giving what has been described as a car crash interview on television.
Can't swear, I bet the Queen was like, what the fuck is he doing?
This whole thing is highly unusual. It's rare you see interviews with the royal family in any circumstance, let alone on something like this.
And this interview only got worse because none of Prince Andrew's explanations made any sense.
Prince Andrew's case, he publicly offered in a press release, offered to cooperate with law enforcement investigating the crimes committed by Jeffrey Epstein. And to date, Prince Andrew has provided zero cooperation.
The son's an absolute moron!
This interview sparking an immediate firestorm, one UK paper calling the prince entitled and obtuse.
We've come to Buckingham Palace in highly unusual circumstances. Normally, we'd be discussing your work, your duty. We'll come on to that. But today, you've chosen to speak out for the first time. Why have you decided to talk now?
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
Prince Andrew. A name that, if you've heard it before, will probably bring some unsavoury thoughts to mind. It's hard to believe sitting here nowadays, but he was once a much-loved and well-respected member of the royal family. With a distinguished military career, the adoration of the general public, and plenty of patronages and charity work under his belt, things were looking pretty good for Prince Andrew at one point in time. That, of course, is all long gone now, and Prince Andrew today has become the equivalent of the royal family's weird, pervy uncle, who's been shunned by his family members, mocked by the public, and disgraced beyond any redemption at this point. And rightly so. Now, the fall of celebrities, politicians, and public figures is nothing new at this point in time. But for a public figure to shoot themselves in the foot and trigger their own momentous downfall, now that's something a little bit rarer and more satisfying. Prince Andrew's reputation hasn't been anything close to clean for a while now, don't get me wrong. His downfall started in the mid-2000s, and he'd arguably still be pretty disgraced today no matter what. However bad his situation and reputation was though, Prince Andrew would make it exponentially worse, all on his own, in about 49 minutes and 25 seconds. The Duke of York's Newsnight interview has been described, amongst other things, as a car crash, as nuclear explosion level bad, and as the royal family's worst public crisis since the death of Princess Diana. And genuinely, I would say that all of that is far too mild in its criticism. Arguably, this clusterfuck of an interview was the final demented chapter in the shady story of an arrogant monarch whose life and story had been unravelling for quite some time now. How on earth did the favourite child of Queen Elizabeth II end up on the BBC looking like he's been dragged backwards through a hedge, rambling about a Pizza Express in Woking and an inability to sweat? Let's take a deeper dive into the worst interview in history and find out.
Did you just say something about Mummy?
Andrew Albert Christian Edward was born on February the 19th, 1960, the third child of Queen Elizabeth II and King Philip.
The British royal family foregather on the lawn of their Scottish Highlands retreat to allow Movietone a rare opportunity to film them all together. Baby Prince Andrew stealing the show.
Look out! It's Nosferatu!
Charles and Anne, the two older siblings, were born in 1948 and 1950 by comparison, so Andrew was in a way a separate generation to his two older siblings and somewhat set apart from them. When Charles and Anne were still very young babies, Queen Liz unexpectedly became the brand new queen in 1952 and was still figuring out how to do all her queening and various royal duties as those two kids were growing up. And as a result, Queen Liz was a little bit more absent from Charles and Anne's early childhood, having to be away across the world performing royal functions and other various duties, and obviously having to leave the kids at home. Andrew, by contrast, had a totally different experience of things, because by 1960, the Queen had settled in and was a well-established monarch, and had a better grip of things in general. She could afford to take a little bit of a back seat for some time, and spend some more time with her new doting baby boy. And as a result, Prince Andrew very quickly became the favourite child. child. He was thoroughly spoilt with lavish gifts and attention in his early years, not just by his mum, but by the media as well, who were more than happy to celebrate his birth. Back at this time, the royal succession in Britain passed over women, unfortunately for Anne, but this meant that Prince Andrew was suddenly second in line to the throne, after Bonnie Prince Charles. He was the spare, and he fleshed out the royal family just a little bit more, which by this point in time had cultivated the image of essentially a celebrity family. The Queen, her husband King Philip, and the three kids all played a unique but very integral role in this happy, upstanding image that the royal family had managed to gain for itself. But they were all independent media personalities in their own right too, especially as the royal children began to grow up. At around 13 years old, a rather loud, boisterous Prince Andrew, who loved to be the centre of attention, was sent to Gordeston boarding school in Scotland. This was very much your stereotypical posh private school, which taught its students things such as flying and sailing, alongside regular topics like English and maths. Taking to the flying in particular, Andrew procured his flying licence while at the school and then left in 1979 to join the Royal Navy as an intelligence officer that specialised in flying. This is essentially the very same model that Andrew's father and older brother had followed, and it would be later followed by Princes William and Harry too.
A jolly old boy's posh twat schooling, followed by a quick stint in the military for one's moral fortitude.
In 1982, Prince Andrew would serve in the Falklands War, which really gave his image an extra boost. The British public felt that he'd genuinely done his part, and he returned home to a very positive reception. From here, and this is very hard to imagine sitting here in the 21st century, but he did become a bit of a sex icon for a little bit. It's not all that uncommon, to be fair. Other British princes have received the same treatment from the media while they're in their 20s, but either way, Prince Andrew would become a little bit of a heartthrob, with his relationships and partners being followed avidly by the media and the public. This is what seems to have solidified his very poorly aged nickname of Randy Andy.
I'll tell you exactly where that originated from. My second day at public school.
Was it 14, 15 years old?
I'm afraid so. I was unfortunate enough in my early days at Gordeston not to realise the rules of the house, which were that you weren't allowed in the girls' house. That's absolutely true, and I was unfortunately caught going through a door in the girls' house saying words and it stuck. Not many people use it nowadays, but I don't think that it actually fits today anyway.
That's not creepy at all.
Eventually though, in 1986, Prince Andrew would go on to marry one Sarah Ferguson, and be bestowed the title of Duke of York to go along with his new wife. Fergie, as Andrew's wife was commonly known, was apparently quite an avid spender, and Prince Andrew was definitely no better himself. The two certainly had a lavish lifestyle anyway, and apparently built up quite the string of bills and debts. And this not only put some strain on Andrew's private life and marriage, but on his public image too. Fergie, too, turned out not to be the dream wife for life that Andrew and the media had envisaged, and after an alleged affair or two, the couple separated in 1992 and formally divorced in 96. And as the 90s went by and came to a close, Prince Andrew would only fade further and further into obscurity. Charles's children, William and Harry, were by this point growing up and becoming media personalities and heartthrobs all of their own. Randy Andy, by contrast, was only getting older and less good looking, and his glory days in the Falklands War were rapidly becoming ancient history. All of his life, Prince Andrew had been the centre of attention. In fact, he'd practically been encouraged to be the centre of attention. From favourite child to wartime action man to desirable celebrity, Prince Andrew was basically conditioned to try and be the loudest, most important, most special person in the room at all times. He desperately wanted to be at the centre of it all, respected and relevant, with a big list of achievements and contacts that he can boast about to boot. He strikes me as quite arrogant, as the sort of person that's never been properly held accountable for anything. And so, as he began to fade into the background, it must have really begun to mess with poor old Prince Andy. Fortunately for him though, he seemingly found a way to escape this inevitable slide into obscurity, in the form of a new friend and contact called Jeffrey Epstein.
Here are 5 types of people you should stop being friends with.
Jeffrey Epstein is a man that really doesn't need an introduction at this point, but here's a fun fact about the guy. He didn't kill himself! By the late 1990s anyway, Mr. Epstein had built himself up quite the reputation. A mysterious, scarily charismatic financier who seemed to know everyone that was worth knowing. That's essentially what Epstein did. Collect famous people. An ever-expanding list of powerful people who perhaps owe Epstein something back, or who he can call upon for a favour, or whose name and prestige he can drop to make himself sound more impressive. It's a trick as old as time. Name drop all the famous people you're friends with, and if you do it right, you'll look more impressive by proxy. Adding Prince Andrew to that list, then, would have been quite beneficial for old Jeffrey. I mean, being friendly with royalty is a pretty powerful piece of clout that not many people can flex. But Epstein could also offer the dwindling Duke of York exactly what he wanted in return as well. The feeling of being relevant again. Epstein's infamous client list includes names like Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, Michael Jackson, Donald Trump, and even Stephen Hawking. And all of these people, maybe less so Professor Hawking, were some of the most famous, important, powerful and successful people that you could find in the late 1990s. And that would have massively appealed to Prince Andrew. Once again, he could be close and around all those influential people in the higher echelons of society, a place that he genuinely seems to believe that he belongs. The two men became quite good friends then, by all accounts, with Epstein apparently even paying off some of Fergie's debts for Prince Andrew at one point. You know, another one of those harmless little favours. This little friendship would start to go sour though in 2005, when the first of many charges was filed against Epstein. Over the next few years he was watched, investigated and eventually arrested in 2008, pleading guilty to 1 count of soliciting prostitution and 1 count of soliciting prostitution from someone under the age of 18. Epstein, like the reptile that he was, would eventually slither out of jail in 2009. But over the next decade, multiple more women would come forward with allegations and evidence all against the man. The accusations against Epstein would only continue to build up, and his client list would eventually unravel for all to see as well. Prince Andrew's name was on it, of course, but there's no surprises there. He'd maintained a very public friendship with Epstein over the years. He was even photographed out with his convicted sexual offender friend in December 2010. In 2011, though, an even more infamous picture of Prince Andrew with then 17-year-old Virginia Giuffre would appear on the internet as well. She is one of the many victims of Epstein's trafficking, and had given evidence for the trial back in 2007 to 2008, where she stated that on the 10th of March 2001, shortly after this picture was taken, Prince Andrew had sex with her. All of this would not help Prince Andrew, whose continued friendship with Epstein was producing a steady stream of criticism, according to the BBC at the time.
That's the understatement of the year.
In July 2011, Prince Andrew would be stripped of his role as UK's trade envoy for his questionable choice of friends, which apparently led him to finally get the hint a little bit and cut ties with Epstein. But by this point in time, the damage was already done. For the most part of the 2010s, the accusations and evidence against Epstein would continue to increase quietly in the background, both in volume and severity, all while Epstein himself was kept on watch. During this time, with the Epstein story largely out of the limelight, Randy Andy did his best to shy away from the situation too, releasing a few statements that insisted he had no memory of this picture with Virginia, that he barely knew and dealt with Epstein, and that he deeply regretted going to visit him in 2010. He stepped out of the public sphere just a little bit, which was probably a decision made for him based on his love of attention, all in the hope that things would slowly simmer down over time. They really didn't though, did they? This would all culminate in Epstein being arrested again in July of 2019. This time on federal sex trafficking charges. Barely a month after the arrest and while awaiting trial, Epstein was found dead in his cell after apparently committing suicide. Which is about as likely as me miraculously sprouting a big head of hair. Anyway, with Epstein dead, the hot water had effectively reached its boiling point, and Prince Andrew was floating right in the centre of it all as the temperature skyrocketed. In August 2019, more evidence came to light that directly linked Prince Andrew to Epstein Epstein's sinister little parties, including an account of him getting a foot massage and an account of him groping a woman. Now, when it was just Virginia Giuffre, Prince Andrew could turn a blind eye quite a bit easier. He can just denounce the picture as fake and moved swiftly on. However, now there are at least 3 independent sources, and that's a lot trickier to ignore. So if you can't ignore the problem any longer, what's the next step? That's right, it's damage control, and suddenly you can begin to see how an interview might come about. It seems that Prince Andrew had been contemplating the idea of an interview for quite some time now. In fact, for at least a year before Epstein's arrest and death, maybe even longer. It was in 2018, though, that Prince Andrew's PR team got in touch with Newsnight about a potential interview. When Sam McAllister, booking agent for Newsnight at the time, got the offer, though, she described it as a puff piece.
Now, in TV industry speak, that means I get to say, hey, I'm Prince Andrew, I'm amazing. Let me tell you more about how I'm amazing. And lastly, I won't take any questions. And by the way, I'm amazing.
So Sam, on the grounds of integrity and for the fact that an interview like that would be truly fucking boring, declined the offer to interview. However, she kept contact open with Prince Andrew's PR team, effectively sending them the occasional "how are you doing?" This kept things a little bit warm until eventually, in May 2019, talks of a potential interview resurfaced.
Things have got a bit worse for Prince Andrew, okay? Jeffrey Epstein's about to be arrested. Everyone's talking more about it. The Daily Mail is writing about how he shouldn't be allowed to walk his daughter down the aisle, Princess Beatrice. She's about to get married.
This time around, the PR team seemed willing to discuss a bit more than just Andrew's glorious charity work. In fact, Sam McAllister managed to negotiate pretty much every topic that Newsnight wanted to discuss. Every single one, that is, except for Jeffrey Epstein. Prince Andrew's PR team put a load of red tape over that particular subject and insisted that it was off the table. So again, on grounds of journalistic integrity, Newsnight declined to interview. Following Epstein's arrest and later death, Newsnight would get back in touch again, asking if Prince Andrew would like to go on the record and set things straight. But the PR team had now changed its tune completely, and now was refusing any interviews outright.
Every month I go back, Amanda is no, 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 no. And my job is really a thin line between harassment and professionalism.
With every development of the Prince Andrew story, though, Sam McAllister would dutifully fire off another email, asking if perhaps now he'd like to come on camera and really establish his side of things. I mean, it's only getting worse. He's got to come on and defend himself in the court of public opinion at some point, right? By the start of November 2019, things were looking so dire for Prince Andrew that his PR team finally relented and asked to discuss terms for an interview. So Sam McAllister, accompanied by interviewer Emily Maitlis, went down to Buckingham Palace to meet with Prince Andrew's private secretary Amanda Thirsk and begin conversations about an interview. Eventually, after some talks, it becomes obvious that an interview is pretty inevitable, and the only way that Prince Andrew could possibly claw back some of his reputation. And with the Epstein story so huge in the media by this point now, there was no way that that topic could be red-taped anymore, either.
12 long days later, we get another invite, and this time we're invited to sit in the palace, face to face with Prince Andrew to do the final negotiation. He's full of energy and enthusiasm and excitement, a persona he kind of kept through this whole experience. And he says, I hope you don't mind, I brought someone with me. I'm thinking, game over, lawyer. His daughter, Princess Beatrice. So now I have to do a negotiation, which I promise you I really prepared for, about him being a potential rapist, a friend of a sex offender, a huge human trafficking ring in front of his daughter.
So, to the amazement of Sam McAllister and Emily Maitlis, Prince Andrew and his PR team agreed to do an unrestricted, in-depth interview on Newsnight. The stage was set.
Oh my God, we're doomed! Now it becomes like a Craig David song, forgive me for being glib momentarily. We do the negotiation on Monday. They say yes on the Tuesday. They want to do it on Wednesday. We do it on Thursday. We tweet about it on Friday, and you guys hopefully watched it on Saturday.
The date was Thursday, November the 14th, 2019. Emily Maitlis, Sam McAllister, Prince Andrew, and all the respective PR people and Newsnight employees were all assembling in Buckingham Palace for the great interview. An interview that would come to be infamous amongst shit shows. According to Sam and Emily, Prince Andrew was in a remarkably good mood before the interview. He was chatting and smiling with people, even asking the cameraman about what shots he was going to do and offering him advice. Prince Andrew was seemingly completely at ease, and that's always a very unnerving thing for your opponent to greet you with. However, he wasn't so at ease because he was uber prepared or he had some great mastermind plan in place. That's probably what the Newsnight lot thought his friendly demeanour meant, and it was probably what they were expecting as well. Alas, no. Prince Andrew was so calm and collected because he had woefully underestimated what the fuck he had just walked into. I have absolutely no idea what Prince Andrew was thinking this was in his head. Perhaps it was just a basic interview or some light publicity and damage control, but in any case, the full gravity of the situation was not impressed on Prince Andrew.
You've chosen to speak out for the first time. Why have you decided to talk now?
Because there is no good time to talk about Mr. Epstein and all things associated. We've been talking to Newsnight for about 6 months about doing something around the work that I was doing. And unfortunately, we've just not been able to fit it into either your schedule or my schedule.
This weirdly conversational opening from Prince Andrew, it just sets the tone of the entire interview. He simply thinks he's just here to do an interview and that this was just the best time to do it in his busy schedule. I mean, he is hopelessly out of his depth here. He's even the first person to name drop Epstein, and that means he's effectively backed himself in a corner. The only topic of interest, the only topic that can now be discussed in this interview is Prince Andrew's involvement with Jeffrey Epstein. Great start.
Am I right in thinking you threw a birthday party for Epstein's girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, at Sandringham?
No, it was a shooting weekend.
A shooting weekend?
Just a straightforward shooting weekend.
The thing that really blew me away when I watched this interview was just how many opportunities Prince Andrew had to distance himself from Epstein, and he takes absolutely none of them. In fact, he goes a step further and demonstrates without question that he's got no remorse about this situation at all. And that's frankly a bit twisted. Do
you regret that trip?
Yes.
Do you regret the whole friendship with Epstein?
Now, still not.
He categorically confirms that he was friends with Epstein and that he doesn't even regret the friendship. But then, at the very same time, he'll also try and insist that him and Epstein weren't really that close friends. And all those meetings, parties, and visits to Epstein's various properties, they were all just convenient and circumstantial.
Just for the record, you've been on his private plane.
Yes.
You've been to stay on his private island.
Yes.
You've stayed at his home in Palm Beach.
Yes.
You've visited Ghislaine Maxwell's house in Belgravia in London.
Yes. And it would be, to some extent, a stretch to say that as it were, we were close friends.
One big point he repeatedly makes is that he was actually more friends with Ghislaine Maxwell and not Epstein himself. Because that makes it all absolutely fine. I mean, Ghislaine isn't fucking dodgy at all now, is she? All of Prince Andrew's defences for himself are built on very trivial, very circumstantial bits of evidence that aren't overly relevant to the main point. When asked about this picture with Victoria Giuffre, for example, he focuses on the fact that it's taken at the top of a flight of stairs and that he's never been upstairs in that house.
The photograph is taken upstairs, and I don't think I ever went upstairs in Ghislaine's house.
When he's asked several times, though, whether the picture is fake, Prince Andrew insists that we can't conclusively prove if the picture is real or fake now.
Nobody can prove whether or not that photograph has been doctored, but I don't recollect that photograph ever being taken.
Seems a bit strange, doesn't it? Insisting on trivia, but refusing to give a straight answer on the direct, important matter at hand. Either way, like I said, there's not even a shred of remorse for any of his actions or for the victims, and that's just sick.
Do I regret the fact that he has quite obviously conducted himself in a manner unbecoming? Yes.
unbecoming. He was a sex offender.
This fixating on staircases is far from the only time, though, that Prince Andrew tries to deflect shit with pointless trivia. For example, on the day that this infamous picture was taken, Prince Andrew was, of course, famously at a Pizza Express in Woking.
We now understand is the date, which is the 10th of March. I was at home. I was with the children. I'd taken Beatrice to a Pizza Express in Woking.
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
He is the most hideous dancer I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it was horrible, and this guy was sweating all over me. Like, his sweat was like, it was raining.
This anecdote about him sweating while dancing with Victoria Giuffre apparently can't be true either, because of course, Prince Andrew has lost the ability to sweat.
There's a slight problem with the sweating, because I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat.
It's false. It's a total fabrication. It never happened. This one was invented by a writer.
I didn't sweat at the time because I had suffered what I would describe as an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War when I was shot at.
I mean, that's just horseshit. Even you know that, Andy. His visit to Epstein in 2010 is brought up too, of course, which Andrew explains as him visiting Epstein one last time to tell him the friendship is over. Apparently, to do it over the phone just wouldn't have been right, and so Prince Andrew chalks his mistake down to being too honourable. Yes, he genuinely says this.
I admit fully that my judgment was probably coloured by my tendency to be too honourable.
That says pretty much all you need to know about Prince Andrew. From his earliest days as the Queen's favourite child, he's never been told no, never been held fully accountable, never been criticised, and never had his mistakes pointed out to him. Of course, Prince Andrew's honourable visit to Epstein in fact lasted 4 whole days.
I'm just trying to work this out, because you said you went to break up the relationship, and yet you stayed at that New York mansion several days. I'm wondering how long.
But I was doing a number of other things while I was there.
But you were staying at the house of a convicted sex offender.
It was a convenient place to stay.
A convenient place to stay? You're the Queen's son, for fuck's sake!
I am not one to, as it were, hug, and public displays of affection are not something that I do.
It's worth making a note too of just how nervous Prince Andrew looks during this interview. I mean, I know it's a close-up shot, but his eyes are darting all around the place, he's constantly fidgeting, and there's accounts from Sam McAllister and other people standing on the sidelines that he wouldn't stop fidgeting his foot and shifting his weight. He's constantly stumbling over his words and trying not to catch himself out as well. I mean, at the very best, it's clear that Andrew did absolutely fuck all preparation for this interview. It's obvious he's making half of this stuff up on the spot, and the only conclusion that I can reach is that he genuinely believes he's good at lying, or he genuinely believes the public is stupid and he's pulled a fast one. And in either case, just how severe and devastating this interview is completely lost on him. Emily Maitlis, I have to say though, is thoroughly impressive throughout this interview. I imagine she must have been absolutely shitting herself in the lead up to it. I certainly would have been. And yet she not only keeps it together, but she also has the intelligence and coolness to notice just how much Prince Andrew is spiralling and going off protocol. I mean, the royal family never talk publicly about their scandals, especially one of this kind, and especially in such great detail on a fucking BBC interview. And so Emily stays mostly quiet, occasionally speaking up to kind of advance the conversation and give Andrew just a little bit more rope to hang himself with. And hang himself, he fucking does. Make no mistake about that, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think anybody before, during, or immediately after this interview could have imagined how monumentally insane this would all be. But I think that the person most surprised and most caught off guard by how it had all gone was Prince Andrew himself.
Get what you fucking deserve!
According to those eyewitnesses at the interview, after the cameras had finally finished recording and been shut off, Prince Andrew smiled and remarked, "Well, that all went quite well, didn't it?" Emily Maitlis quipped back, "What, sir? Like a walk in the park?" Putting aside that ruthless bit of quick wit though, Prince Andrew did genuinely seem to believe that the interview had gone completely fine.
This is the face of the man at the end of that interview. He looks like he's won the lottery. Emily looks like we've shot her dog.
So Prince Andrew still had no idea of the true gravity of the situation, even after the interview finished. However, what was becoming increasingly apparent, though, was that all of Prince Andrew's PR teams and representatives were not expecting what they just saw. Now, make no mistake, I don't think any of Andrew's staff thought that the interview was going to go brilliantly. I mean, Andrew's PR advisor actually resigned the day before the interview. None of them, though, could have imagined how horrifically bad this would be. I mean, to be honest, I think the only way this could have been worse for Prince Andrew was if the interview was conducted by the FBI.
Can I ask you a straight question? When the director said cut, did you think this man has been lying to me?
I thought that he had tried very hard to remember his lines.
So when did the penny finally drop for old Andy then? Well, probably not until the interview finally went out, 2 days later on November the 16th. In the hours following its release to the public, dear old Queen Lizzie must have eventually seen the interview, and we can only imagine what she must have thought of it.
Philip, are you watching this? He's using a Pizza Express in Woking as an alibi. Philip, what's he talking about? He can't sweat. Is he fucking brain dead, Philip?
Emily Maitlis and her gang at Newsnight have all said they were under the impression that the interview had been approved by the Queen and the royal family. But actually, it turns out that might not be the case. Insiders at Buckingham Palace have disputed this and claimed that she actually wasn't in the know, or at the very least wasn't in full possession of the facts. And this is apparently the only way that this interview got greenlit. It was only when the Queen received the transcript on that Saturday that she realised just how disastrous this interview was, and at that point, Prince Andrew got a little tap on the shoulder. From here, things went downhill pretty quickly for Andrew. On the 20th of November, just 4 days after the interview was broadcast, Buckingham Palace released a statement in Andrew's name stating that he'd be stepping back from all royal duties for the foreseeable future. Foreseeable future, though, very quickly became forever, as next, Prince Andrew was very swiftly stripped of all of his military titles. By the end of 2021, the Queen had also stripped him of all his royal titles, patronages, and official duties. He even lost his official title of His Royal Highness, which effectively demotes him back down to the rank of normal citizen like the rest of us. The Queen was seemingly so thorough that he even had all of his social media pages deleted, and his biography on the royal family's website has been rewritten in the past tense. In a stroke both quick and ruthless, the Queen completely cut Prince Andrew out of the picture. And, maybe for the first and only time in her life, she genuinely disciplined her favourite child. For now though, this was the least of Prince Andrew's problems. I mean, Epstein may be dead, but the FBI was still investigating all his little friends, the inquests were still steaming on quickly, and Virginia Giuffre was still testifying left, right and centre. Before long, Virginia and her legal team squared up and got ready to take this case to a formal trial. And at first, it seems like Prince Andrew was willing to get up on the podium and actually defend himself in a court of law. However, after being dropped as a royal officially, Andrew likely started to reconsider his options. I mean, if he did end up in a court now, he wouldn't have any military or royal titles, he wouldn't have any special protection, he'd just be a regular dude like the rest of us. And so, with that much scarier prospect in mind, Prince Andrew decided to settle the case out of court, about a month before it was due to go to trial. Despite the undisclosed and probably very hefty sum that Prince Andrew had to pay Virginia Giuffre, this did at least allow him to not admit he was guilty of anything. However, the lack of admission of guilt, it only really came back to bite Andrew in the arse and make himself look even worse in the eyes of the public. As well as this, despite claiming that he would, both in the Trainwreck interview and in the statement released afterwards, Prince Andrew has offered absolutely no help to any of the Epstein investigations or to any federal prosecutors. Again, just a little bit sus there, Andy. Following the Queen's death at the end of 2022, Prince Andrew was briefly seen at her funeral. However, the main difference was he was wearing a regular mourning suit, no military apparel, and wasn't really allowed any official role in the service either. All he got to do, really, was walk behind his mother's coffin. And he even got heckled for that. Since then, Andrew has tried to step further and further back from the public eye, but the public haven't forgotten about him. Several documentaries and dramatisations about the now infamous interview have been released in the 5 years since it was broadcast, and this has helped keep Prince Andrew in the public mind in probably the worst way possible. To date, he's hiding out living in the Royal Lodge estate in Windsor, the luxurious mansion that he's been leased by the Crown since 2003. However, with stories surfacing that his royal funding might finally be coming to an end, he may well end up losing this too before long. The fact that the royal family is even looking after Prince Andrew is probably to be expected, sadly, but it's still not a great look, and this mounting criticism might be the reason behind Prince Andrew's pocket money potentially being pulled. But in any case, Andrew has no way of getting a formal position back in the royal family now. That ship has long since sailed. Just as he didn't understand the severity of the interview, I don't think Andrew understood quite how much trouble he was in either. Following the Queen's death, it appears that he actually approached Charles and inquired about maybe coming back eventually to the royal family in a formal position. The new King Charles, however, shut that idea down quicker than he shut down his marriage with Princess Diana. By all accounts, the relationship between the two royal brothers isn't great anyway, and Charles actively seems to want Andrew out of Royal Lodge. The situation described by insiders is apparently that of a siege. I suspect Andrew's relationship with Charles's son, the future King William, is even more distant and strained. And let's be realistic here, guys. King Charles is not a young man. From every angle that you look at it, Andrew seemingly is on more and more borrowed time. But that's essentially where things sit at the moment. Andrew is effectively in some sort of weird royal limbo, hiding out in an estate and doing his very best not to be noticed by the public that hate him. Apparently, all he does these days is watch TV, play the occasional golf in his garden, and do some plane spotting. He gets food deliveries secretly to his door, he's got no official staff left, and the only company he's really got is his ex-wife. That's right, long story short, because of how weird the royal family is about divorce, the two of them still fucking live together. All in all, compared to his earlier life of flying around the world as an envoy, it's a marked difference. His other shitty nickname, Air Miles Andy, is now poorly aged too. Ultimately, Prince Andrew deserves everything he's gotten and more, obviously. And if there's one thing that we've learned about this man, it's that he's a complete and total moron above all else. I mean, a man that has been managed and taken care of by his mother and the Crown for the entirety of his life, well, he's not going to be the best at independent decision making, is he? Andrew comes off as a reckless, impulsive and arrogant man who's basically been able to do as he pleased for the entirety of his life, and has suddenly now had to deal with the consequences of his vile and degenerate actions. He has no remorse whatsoever. He seems genuinely incapable of taking proper accountability for himself, and whatever happens to him next, it will likely only continue this steep downward trajectory that we've been seeing since 2019. Long may it continue, I say.
Is there anything you feel has been left unsaid that you would like to say now?
No, I don't think so. I think you've probably dragged out most of what is required.
You are a sad, strange little man.
So then, kids, we've reached the end of another epic video. Thanks so much for watching. Please smash like if you think the royal family should be abolished. I don't know, I do find this interview weirdly comforting in a way, because if I'm having like a bad day, or feel really shit about myself, or feel particularly down, I watched this interview and I suddenly feel really good about myself again. It's just a reminder that you haven't hit rock bottom. You know, it's fucking good. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. And hey, if you did, feel free to watch some of my other videos, subscribe maybe, and support the channel a little bit. It really does help. Thanks for anything you can do. I've got a nice little arsenal of mockumentaries like this you can binge, and there's plenty more mockumentaries in the pipeline. There'll be some coming soon, so keep your eyes peeled for those too. Anyway, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Remember to tie your shoelaces, and I'll leave you with this little passing thought. What do you call an unemployed jester? Nobody's fool.